Welcome to Intersect, a podcast where we find connection in each other's story. Today I'm here with my co-host, Mrs. Ingrid Moo, and our niece, Angel Crisp. We met Angel over 3 years ago. Her and Michael have been married for about 3 years. And they met in high school together. And Angel is on a little bit of a faith journey right now, I think. I don't know. Where do you want to start, Angel?
I would say that I am on a faith journey. I'm trying to push myself through school, knowing that, like, God cut that out for me. It's hard for me to have motivation. So I've tried to, I was listening to Air One Radio. I don't know if you know what that is.
Not sure, but go ahead.
It's like 93.1. They play like Christian music. Mm-hmm. And one of the ladies on there was talking about, like, even if you don't want to get up and do it, if you start your day with something that's positive, no matter how you feel when you wake up, like you just make yourself, I don't know, in a sense. Yeah. So I've been trying to read my Bible when I wake up to maybe just read something that's going to push me through the day.
Okay. And, where are you reading from currently?
Nothing specifically. I usually just open it. I just pray over it because I've never read the Bible, so I have, no direction.
Okay.
I don't know what the books in the Bible talk about. I really don't know much about it. So I just pray and then open and read something.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's all I've been doing.
Is there anything that when you just prayed and opened it, you're like, okay, yeah, wow, cool. That was...
The first time I ever did that, Michael and I were actually bickering. I can't even tell you what about. It was something so minuscule, like he didn't put up the cups how I would put them up. I struggle with that too, but...
Yeah.
I opened the Bible, I prayed over it, and I opened it, and it felt like God was sitting in the room with us and was like, yeah, you'll need to do this better. Mm-hmm. It was almost like I was reading just what I needed to hear. And so I was like, I'm just going to start praying over it and opening it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I have done it that way, because anytime I've done that, it's like he's speaking exactly to what I prayed about. Wow.
So you just open it, it feels like every time there's something that's speaking to you.
And the other day, I was running late to school, and I was having the pharmacology HESI, which is the end exam for nursing school for pharmacology. Okay. And you have to make an 81 or better, or you fail to proceed. Mm-hmm. So I was really nervous. I hadn't studied because I wasn't responsible. So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to pass this. This is really a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I opened it, and it was talking about how I don't know what book it was, but it was talking about how you can't be lazy. And in the She Reads Truth Bible, it really translate a lot of it to lay terms. Okay. So it's very easy for me to read and understand. Mm-hmm. And it was just talking about how that laziness and waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen, but you're not willing to make sure you cut out the time for it. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like that was also God's way of being you need to cut more time out for me. You want a relationship with me, but you sit for hours and play on your phone. And sometimes I literally look over at my Bible and I'm like, wow, I've been on TikTok for 30 minutes. I could have been reading my Bible. I've been feeling that way a lot lately. And I just feel like he's calling me out in a way, because he feels me wanting to come to him, but he's like, you're not doing what you need to do completely. Okay. And I felt that way about school. He was like, you want this, but you have to make sure you're cutting the time out for it.
I can relate to that. I mean, I've been, I guess, a pastor for 26 maybe years. I don't know. But some mornings it's the TikTok thing. I'm not a TikToker, but I'll be I don't know, this morning or this afternoon, I'm looking at videos about how to replace the screen on Ingrid's Mac. And I'm we do this Sabbath thing. And I'm like, well, do I really need to do that on Sabbath? Probably not, So I think we all wrestle sometimes with, okay, do I spend time doing what I want to do, or is this a special time I could connect with God? Ingrid, you said one time that you were with a friend and you guys were praying or something, looking for promises to claim. And she said something, well, it is, how does that story go?
No, it's really, sometimes I can get really tripped up. Like if I try to write an encouraging note or something to somebody and I'm like, I don't know which one, what Bible verse, what should I do? And she's like, Ingrid, it's the word of God. You don't have to worry about it. It will not go void. And that has just released me because I'll become paralyzed that I have to have the right verse.
Yeah, that's good. So when you were saying that, it reminded me of that.
Yeah, and I think like feeling like you have to say the right thing to someone. I feel like if they're open to receive, because this is how it is when I open my Bible at random. If you're open to receive what you need to hear, like any Bible verse, I feel like can speak some kind of truth in your life. You're meant to read it.
That's cool. I do this thing with scripture. I do. I like to write, so I like to journal. So not every day, but many times I'll open the Bible and I'll write down the verse that kind of whether it's just I have a question about it or I feel like God's talking to me or whatever. And so I have this little acronym, HELP. So heed is to pay attention or to notice. So when I do that heed step, I'll write down the verse and then
what's jumping out at you.
Yeah. And then I'll engage in a little reflection where I'll just write an observation about the verse, why I thought it was significant. So the other day I was reading about in John 9, Jesus heals this blind man and the disciples are like, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus responds is neither. This happened so that God might be glorified, that the works of God might be displayed. And I was struck with the thought of God used this blind man to help people see. That was my little observation, And then the listen part of the little acronym, so we heed, we engage. Listen is kind of well, God, what are you trying to say into my experience from this little reflection time? And then pray is just I'll just respond conversationally to God. So heed, engage, listen, pray, help. So that's how I seek God's help through.
That's what I like about the She Reads Truth Bible. It has a lot of footnote area. So it has something that was kind of backboned like that. Help model.
Yeah.
It on every book of the Bible. It'll have an outline of things, spots to write questions and then write what you found about it
Nice.
or what you feel about it. It's really interesting.
Do you ever write and stuff? No, you just kind of
haven't got to that yet.
Yeah,
no.
You just kind of read through and then just kind of take in some of the extra stuff and whatnot.
Well, when I was growing up, we would go on Sundays to a very Southern Baptist church.
What is a very Southern Baptist church like?
Hypocritical.
Oh.
And so, you go in your Sunday's best. It's a requirement.
Okay.
And, they say come as you are, but I feel like a lot of churches lack that they actually mean that. I feel like if you don't come as you are and you come a little bit different than their image, that there's a problem with that. So that's how I grew up. I grew up very poor and abused. And we didn't go to church in anything near a Sunday's best. And our clothes had holes in them. We were usually with our mom, who was very heavily on drugs.
So it might have been your Sunday's
right.
best, but for the people there, it wasn't good enough.
Right. And so we would go, and they would always feel like they had to help us, which is nice. A lot of times we ate because of the food pantry at the church. But it was always so backhanded. Those little sweet old ladies are like, yeah, here's your food. But then they would question us about what our mom and our stepdad was doing.
Oh.
I don't know how to explain it. It was so, the church I was in, not that all are like this, but the church I was in was extremely hypocritical. And I feel like anything you did, you're damned to hell. Like, I just don't think they felt like God was forgiving in any way, shape, or form. And I just saw, like, my own grandmother be so, what the outsider would say, like, oh my goodness, like, I strive to live through Christ in the way that this woman does. She portrays the way Christ wants you to live so well. And she did.
Your grandmother did.
At church. But then we'd go home and she'd have us put, like, roast beefs in our clothes and food at the grocery store, like, to steal. Oh. And so, like, I watched all these people just be two ways. So that's why church has always been it's been so hard for me to go to any church.
But wasn't it during your high school years that you were part of a youth group? And that was really...
Yeah, I got taken away when I was 15 years old because of all of the abuse. And this lady named Carrie, I will never forget her, was like the head of the youth program. And that is what sparked my interest and changed my life. Like, so much bad was going on in my life. But I was so positive and so happy. Like, I think my sisters made fun of me because I was like, just be positive. That was my favorite sentence at that time. But I felt so much happiness because I knew anything that was going wrong, I could just sit and tell God. And I still do that to this day. Even in, like, seasons where I wasn't particularly doing what I was supposed to or going through something really hard. Like, I just sit and conversate. Even though, like, he can't talk back. But, yeah.
So you would do that with God, and that kind of flowed out of this youth leader that you met?
She's amazing.
What was her name again?
Carrie. And I wish I could find her. Like,
oh, wow.
Like, I love that woman still to this day. I think about her.
And was that here in Chattanooga? Oh, wow.
What was so special about her? What stands out?
Well, her children were adopted. She couldn't have children. And I don't know why I think because, like, I was living with my grandma because I'd been taken away. It was like a temporary placement. I felt so lost, and I felt like she, like, kind of adopted me, too. I don't know. She really... And she knew about me. Like, I mean... She took me to something called D-Now, which was like a weekend retreat where all these, like, kids grew up in the church, and we all went to this, like, event through Christ, which is where I was saved. And I don't know, it felt so good to be around kids who, like, other kids who, like, had the same interest, and they were all so positive. Like, they didn't have things going on that were so bad. It was really nice. I don't know how to explain it.
I have to play this thing. If I can play it into the mic, it's random. This is the way my brain works and how podcasts somehow turn out for me. I don't know if I can find this really quickly, but when you kept saying the word positive, and it made me think of this today. Fiddle. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it or not.
I feel like positivity really is, like, for me, that's a word that, like, really like resonates with, like, God for me, is positivity. Only because, like, he didn't, like, he was around everybody. He would sit with the homeless before he sat with the king.
For sure. I found it. Here's the clip.
I can't do negative today. Positive vibes, positive vibes.
I love that. Positive vibes, positive vibes. And then she's waving her finger. I can't do negative today. Positive vibes. Anyways, so there was this sense of positivity, a sense of as you were talking, I was just like, a contrast between what you were experiencing in your church experience that you had been to where it felt hypocritical, and whatever it was about Carrie, Miss Carrie, was, it almost was like, there's people like me that have been through some stuff, or at least it feels like they like me. So they're kind of like me. It feels like they like me. I don't feel like I'm the oddball out, and just a sense of like a welcoming in that opened up the capacity for you to talk to God.
Yeah, and I think that the part of her being so welcoming was so important because of the way I grew up. You know, from a young age, I always felt like the outcast or like unwelcome, unwanted, always walking on eggshells. So that church experience when I was little just kind of put fuel to that fire. I was like, wow, like they don't want us here.
Okay.
That's how I felt. But with Carrie, she was so kind. Like, I don't know. She's an amazing person. And, you know, the son she adopted had special needs, I believe. And she just did such a good job. Like, I know her daughter, I don't know if her daughter was my age or a little bit older or younger. But I just remember thinking, man, I wish I had a mom like that. Like, she just...
Yeah.
And her husband and her were so peaceful. Like, I had never seen two adults get along like that in my entire life. And I was just like, wow, love exists like that. Like, there was just so much about her and going to church with her and having that experience that, like, changed my mind.
How long were you a part of that youth group?
For about a year. About the year that I was misplaced from my dad's house.
It's amazing how significant for a teen what's almost seems like a relatively short period of time, but how significant that can be when the right people come along.
I think community for teenagers is very important. I think it takes a village to make a teenager, even a teenager who has a pretty good life. Like, I feel like still having that community and having multiple adults that you can lean on is very important.
Yeah.
So I found that in Carrie. And sometimes I even think, I'm like, I can think back to things she told me when I was 15. And I use that still to this day.
So what's a thing that you use at 21? That
Well, one time I was like in tears talking to her because, you know, my dad was looking at like 15 years in prison and we didn't know if we were ever going to get to go home. And it felt like our situation at Meemaw's was even worse than being home. And she was like, you know, one day it's going to be different. She always just told me, it's going to change. This is temporary. This isn't forever.
Wow.
And I'm like, you know, when you're 15, you feel like a year's 5 years, especially when you're ready to turn 18, you're ready to do things on your own. I think she always told me it's not temporary. It's temporary. It's not permanent.
So that gave you hope.
Yeah.
Which I still wish I could go back to little Angel and be like, it's going to change. Things are going to get so much better. Because I never felt like it would end.
And maybe you can. Maybe in a way you can. Like, I know that one of my favorite persons is Brene Brown, which I often reference. But she talks about, like, in her studies, when she was studying shame and human resilience and connection, she wanted to learn about how we connect. And as she got into her research, she's like a grounded researcher. So she does like literally thousands and thousands of interviews with different people. And as she got into her research, she realized in order to get a better sense of what connection is, she's going to have to unpack shame. And in order to do that, she's going to have to see a counselor, is what the people where she was wearing. I was like, oh, great. So she goes into the first day to her counselor and she's like, okay, I know I got to do this, but no childhood crap. And she used a little more choice word than that. And yet I think there's something about learning resilience that to be able to tell that little boy or little girl inside of us, this is temporary.
It almost lets them like rest. Because I always mourn the childhood I never had around these times of the year, especially Christmas, Thanksgiving. I mean, Michael can tell you, I cry about it a lot because I feel like I never had a childhood and then like nothing magical. So when Christmas rolls around, like it's almost like I'm searching for something to like heal that part of me. And that's why like I've been so drawn to like read the Bible and stuff because I just want to heal that part of me. Like, it's almost like I can just hear little Angel being like, go you, because you're finally like doing things that make you happy.
Oh.
But it is almost like, and I feel like a lot of people who grew up in an abusive home and then just never had any fulfillment when they were little. It's almost like, going to nursing school and knowing I graduate in September. I've made straight A's. I've done a very good job. It's almost like imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Like, you don't really think you're the one doing it, or it's never good enough.
Wow. So even though you've made huge strides because of the past, there's this tug of war between those traumatic hits or those painful moments. It's like in tension with this present that's like, man, you've accomplished some things and some great stuff is happening.
But then it's like you're kind of like emotionally detached. Like, until I see until I see it all the way through and I graduate nursing school, I probably will have this weird, like, unemotional attachment. I'm like, I don't really care.
Because I don't want to get my hopes up. Because what if something happens?
It's like you always prepare for the worst. Which is really not a good way to live, because then you're negative and not positive. So I think that's where that was such a big deal, because I've always been negative. So that, like, year I was with Carrie a lot, just being able to be like, let's just be positive, really changed my outlook. I wish I could get back to that.
Sounds like you are.
I'm trying. I'm trying to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you inspire courage. Like, my sense of you, whenever you've been around, is you bring joy.
Thanks.
Yeah. Just your smile and your radiance.
And I just want to go back to when you were saying, like, you learn resilience, because I almost forgot to say this, but I wanted to. That is the least, like, I hate that compliment, because people think it's a compliment. They're like, oh, you're so resilient. I'm like, thank you, because it is a good thing. But at the same time, I'm like, but what child should have to be resilient? Like, why did I have to be resilient? Because, I had a lot of failed suicide attempts. I did.
That doesn't sound like the kind of resilience anybody wants to
But
have.
I really did. Yeah. The first time I ever tried to commit suicide, I was 9 years old. And, I mean, I haven't been hospitalized in like 2.5 years, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Because my life has already greatly changed. But, like, they always told me in the hospital, I'm recovering from whatever I tried to do. And they're like, you're just so resilient. I mean, I have a couple care plans from 5-6 years ago that just say, like, those things about me. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to be resilient anymore. I just don't.
So what do you want to be? Or what would be helpful to hear?
I don't know. The courage was kind of nice, because I don't think anyone's ever said that to me. But I think it is, like, when you're young and you have to go through that, it does make you a little, like, courageous and brave, because you have to face so much. I think what puts it in spectrum for me is seeing kids the age I was when I was going through the most. Like, my sister's sister-in-laws are just little girls. I mean, they're 11 and 9. And, I committed suicide. I tried to commit suicide at 9. So I just see her, and she's so innocent, and she, plays with dolls. And, I mean, the Elf on the Shelf thing. I mean, I made that magical. We had a sleepover at Taylor's. And I'm just like, when I was 9, I didn't believe in any of that. I was cooking 3 meals a day for my sisters and I. We were home alone for days at a time, just fending for ourselves. So I think it makes me and both of my sisters emotional when we, like, meet children the age we were. And it's like, wow. Like, we didn't have no chance to be able to, color or play.
Do you ever find yourself having so you mentioned is it your sister's kids, the 9 and 11-year-old?
No, it's my sister's, like, brother's siblings. It's her sister-in-laws, but they're little. Okay.
So you get to be with them sometimes. And do you, like, so do get down and do stuff with them, like
And
color?
it's so fun. Yeah, like I do. That day we had the sleepover just a couple days ago. I bought air dry clay and we made clay sculptures for people for Christmas, and we colored, and we were at Walmart, and they love Pokemon cards. So I snuck Pokemon cards and I bought them. They didn't know. The elf brought them. When they got there, the elf, we did not put the elf on the floor in the bathroom, but they were like, oh my goodness, the elf, it moved by the toilet. I was like, it's probably using the bathroom, and y'all came in, it had to run away. You couldn't see it using the bathroom. But like, it's just so fun making it magical, because it kind of makes it magical for me too. Like when I have children, I am going to be so over the top. Like they're going to believe in Santa Claus until they're like 12 or 13 because they're going to be like, no, my mom says Santa's real.
And there's a guy, Jesse, that I want to do a podcast with, and he wrote this children's book that's about like, coming of age, and it's all in the framework of like a candy narrative or whatever. And so I can't wait to talk. Like, you're making me think about this now. But what do you think it is for kids, or just for yourself, that you think to have this sense of magical or this sense of fantasy or whatever it is? Why do you think that that's important for kids to experience or enter into? Or
I think it's because when you become an adult and like you face, I guess you could say, like real world problems, like sometimes you don't have money for your bills, or, you get laid off of work, or you get fired, or relationship problems. Like if you didn't have that magical, like hope and happiness when you were little, like it just makes everything in adult life so much more treacherous, because it's been like, I didn't have anything magical when I was little. So it feels like I've been an adult for so long already. When you're an elder, you're kind of over it. You're like, man, I've lived a good life, but I'm tired of dealing with all these life problems. But at 21, I'm tired of dealing with all these life problems, because I've been presented with them since as long as I can remember. So I think a magical childhood is important, because it shouldn't be nothing but magical for kids. I mean, they should be able to color when they get home from school and not have to worry about a thing at all, because there's so much of your life that you do have to worry about stuff.
Well, and I think the research says, like even a lot of business literature and whatnot, talks about this idea that playfulness is really critical to great leadership, to innovation in the marketplace, or innovation in healthcare, or so learning to be playful. I mean, Ingrid, you're an educator. Tell us about the impact of playfulness that you feel like. You work in a forest school, so.
Yeah, I work in a forest school, forest kindergarten and first grade, and the kids play outside literally for 2.5 hours every day. And there's so much learning that takes place in play. And they're out there, and last week they were dogs, and they were on the ground, running around, and then one of the dogs got hurt, and so they carried the dog like a human stretcher to the hospital, and they did bandage work on the dog, but it took teamwork and listening to each other and problem solving. And so what they say, the research says, is that these kids may be, because they're not driven academically as much at a young age, so they could be a little bit behind maybe in kindergarten and first grade, but by third grade they soar, because they've learned so much problem solving and getting along and playing outside. They watch the trees change in the seasons, and they listen to the birds, and they look for the animals. I mean, last year, one of the students was the one that spotted a snake in the tree, and they have a whole rigmarole of capturing the snake and removing it and putting it in a safe location. And so there's a lot of learning that takes place in play.
So that's interesting too, because you can have this like fantasy world that feels magical, but then even just being in the natural world of all that God has created, sometimes we can have those magical moments of you said the snake in the tree, and I'm thinking like, wow, as an educator, you could like dig into the Genesis story of like, and the serpent was wise, and, the woman heard him speaking to her, all this, and that's stuff that some people will go like, well, that's magical. That never took place. But like, well, what if it did? And then what does that mean? And, so there's these, I think even those kind of narratives, even in scripture that seem supernatural or magical, like, they capture our imagination. They even like today we're at Crosswalk Church and Pastor Dave was talking about, some people they think a virgin birth is just crazy making. And yet like, well, what's the difference between that and say Jesus rising from the dead, or, and if there isn't this reality of something beyond just what we can see and hear and kind of from a very naturalistic experience define, if there's not some sort of mystical, supernatural reality, do we really have hope?
Right. And I think like when you're little, the hope is like probably not quite as deep, with like an elf on the shelf or with Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. But when you become an adult, like I guess with like faith, you have that hope that God's there and he's listening. Yeah. And that's a lot easier to hold on to. And I think that's what's healing for me in so many ways is, I can hold on to that hope that like he listens to what I'm asking for, or he just is there with me when I feel lonely. And I think that's what's like magical about like having a good faith. Yeah. Because it is magical in a way, Yeah. You don't see God in front of you. He's not in the flesh right here in front of you where you can shake his hand and give him a hug. You just have to know he's there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And, I think this might be a good place to kind of wrap it up. But I'm thinking about, like, Jesus said this thing, to enter the kingdom of heaven, you should become like a little child.
Because children are innocent. Their minds are so innocent until they're corrupted, but they're so innocent. They'll just run with what you tell them. That's why it's also important to base faith when they're really little, because they can grow up with God and the magic. And
your desire to speak to little angel, I think, is really Jesus' desire.
Probably. There's a couple letters that I wrote, and I'll actually have to get them so y'all can read them. They make me cry every time. But my aunt had cancer when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and there are so many letters I wrote to Jesus when I was a little girl. I was like, please heal her cancer. I know you can heal her cancer. Like I was I always prayed when I was little. I just felt like that's all I could do.
Maybe that was the magic of your childhood.
Yeah, and that's why in adulthood, I think that's why no matter how far I've fallen away from God, I'm always pulled back to God, because I've always based everything off of that hope that he can protect me.
Well, I know this is crazy, but would you be willing to say a prayer for whoever happens to listen to this as we close?
Sure.
Okay.
I can.
Okay.
God, I want to thank you that we're here together. And I hope that anybody who listened to this that just needed to hear anything we said, or resonates, or didn't have a great childhood, that they always know that they've had that hope and they've always been protected by your touch. God, I want to thank you that I was able to be on this podcast. And it was really interesting. I've never done one. I want to thank you that we're here together. And I just want you to bless all the listeners, and Jim and Ingrid and me. And we just want to thank you for this great day and this Christmas season. Amen.
We want to thank you for joining us at Intersect, and we pray that you will experience a magic which is real, the magic of faith and hope and love and prayer and joy, and hearing Jesus speak to your little child inside of you saying, you are loved, you are mine, way to go.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.